Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Trip Sitting Podcast. Thank you all for joining me today. And this is a really awesome episode. And I'm recording this right now, and Mercury retrograde is finally fucking over. And I'm usually not one that's like ever sensitive to that shit, but I literally found this Mercury retrograde, which I think started like April 20th or 21st or some shit like that. Like immediately, like everything was just like, what the fuck going on right now? And it was just like that for a couple weeks. And now it's finally over. And I can genuinely say that things are like very much coming back together. They're clearer and very much just on an upswing, which I find very interesting. I'm still not going to say I am a firm believer, but I'm definitely not a disbeliever at this point in time. Um, so I hope everybody was able to weather that storm and everything's really coming together. And also, one thing I've noticed now that things are kind of coming out and I'm starting to feel back in that like real flow state, like when things are going super well for me and everything seems like it's coming together, it's almost like uncomfortable because I think I just grew up in just such a constant state of like what's happening, what's going on, like needing to keep like my central nervous system in check that like it's so used to the dysfunction and things just not always going my way and not being in that flow state that once I'm in that state, there's like this weird sort of like internal anxiety and tension that I very much feel. And I just notice it now. Like, I'm not doing anything about it, I'm not trying to make it go away. It's literally just like noticing it and continuing like business as usual, without making a big deal or without trying to change anything. It's just like so interesting noticing that when you're used to the dysfunction and kind of being in like that fight or flight mode that once you're out of it, you no longer, that's not necessarily comfortable. So it's just learning how to be comfortable in that state. And, eventually now when I'm in that state, it'll actually, feel good, but I'm certainly enjoying myself. In the meantime, for this episode, we have on the Flying K. That's what he goes by. And he's just somebody that I connected with through trip sitting. And this episode is really just like a really open and honest conversation just about fucking life and, going through those stages in life. He used to be an alcoholic and now he's been sober for the past couple of years, and psychedelics were a big part of that journey. And it's just, there's no right way to be human. That's the whole point of this podcast, is exploring what that means. And everybody goes through so many different things in their life, so many ups and downs. And it's really just about how we weather that storm and how we come out on the other side. And we just continue to do that until eventually we're no longer here. So this conversation, I think, really kind of sums up that process really well. It's a lot of wisdom in there, a lot of honesty, a lot of vulnerability, and I hope everybody enjoys. And also, real quick, if you could follow, subscribe, and then also leave a review for this podcast, that would be super helpful and that'd be greatly appreciated by me. It helps me get in front of more people. But without further ado, here is the podcast with Flying K. Where did the name Flying K come from?
Oh, it's an interesting. Yeah, my middle name is my mom's maiden name, which is Kate, and so everybody called me, Kate a lot in college. And we were just at a concert, you know, and I was on MDMA, just experimenting in college, and all of a sudden I was at the back of this weird venue that doesn't really have concerts anymore, which is interesting, but it's like an old grocery store. It's very historic in Kansas City. And I was just in the back, like walking around with my arms, like out like a bird. And someone was just like, look, it's Flying K. And I was just kind of like meandering throughout the crowd like that, as like a 20-year-old, I didn't even know what I was doing. I was just enjoying myself, being free, no qualms about anybody, no having any kind of
just just
meandering and
vibes.
just vibes, just being who I am. And it's funny because I do have have some kind of association with birds now. I really think that my full on spirit animal right now is a bald eagle. On my walk this morning, in my favorite tree in the park by my house, and I've been, going on this walk for a while, and I would go up to this tree and I would, put my hand on it because I feel like it helps strengthen my intuition and things like that. And all of a sudden, now there's an owl that created a nest and is sitting with babies in it. And I'm not saying, oh, it's flying. The flying K is the reason that there's this owl in there. But for the past like 6 months, I've been walking by this tree, giving it a hug, saying hi to it, and now there's owls living. So it's all, we're all connected, right? I mean, that's what I'm getting at here. And so, long story short, that's where.
Yeah, I think once you take enough psychedelics, you tend to realize the interconnectedness of all living creatures, like regardless of what it is, and like the ability to put energy into the world or into something else, and then see how like the circle of life actually like plays out in just normal like everyday shit that we normally are just like way too fucking blinders on to notice.
Totally. And I think as men, you and I, that's a realization that it's a hard thing for a lot of other men. I think, what's bringing you and I together is that like-minded idea that you just brought up.
Yeah. For men and feelings, especially that I think is like one of the most difficult things for us to like admit that we even have, at least for me, like just admitting that I even like had feelings, like that was a huge step for me, and that I wasn't just like like all the time.
Well, and I think that the fact that you're allowed to experience those feelings in all facets is what's complicating a lot of other men's lives, not necessarily yours or I's right now, but other people who are like, why do I feel so sad about, let's just use yesterday's news, like the Tennessee shooter, or why do I feel so sad about some of these things, or why am I so angry about that? And men just don't know where to put those feelings in the right place. And honestly, that's what really motivated me to begin birthing that podcast that I did, was just feelings, that I had personally, and that, creating that was therapeutic for me. I don't care if anybody listened to it. My whole idea behind that podcast was, if I find one man that listens to my podcast that was down in the bottle, or going through a hard time, lost a job and they needed to turn their life around in some sort of way, and it worked for them like it did for me, then in my mind my podcast was a success.
Yeah.
I don't care about listeners. I don't promote the thing. I mean, I tell people about it. I have like-minded individuals that might be interested to listen to my words. I tell people about, but I'm not pounding on doors anymore, being like, "Hey, listen to this," because I don't, it's just to each their own. And there's just so many podcasts out there that, it's people's time and things like that.
Well, so like to that point about like, that being a therapeutic source for you, of like essentially like you had all these feelings that you needed to get out, like that piece right there, the second piece, like getting the feelings out, that's the part that I think people probably just struggle with the most, is like understanding to not like hold all of that energy in, like all of those emotions and stuff. If you don't let them out, like that's going to get trapped inside of you somewhere. And like, that's going to then cause all these other probably like health issues that you might happen, that you might just associate with random shit. But like a lot of the time it really is just like feelings that we hold in that we don't have a way of letting out. But like that act of letting it out, regardless of how you do it, like that is the foundation of the therapeutic process, whether you're like in therapy or like, again, speaking into a fucking mic on a podcast, writing down your thoughts in a journal. Like that thought is how you process shit.
I think that, back to kind of this idea of men in this day and age, which I think is a very powerful thing going on. But like, I'm 44, and so that podcast was the first time in my life, really, that I was doing something as a hobby that I didn't care about the results. Because I was conditioned from, and a lot of people are conditioned from such a young age, and it's the old adage that time is money, right? And energy and time, that's your energy. That's what you're doing. You have to be making money, and I'm just like, I don't care about money. I care about processing the way that I'm feeling so that I can move forward in a healthy, meaningful, connected life,
Yeah.
to make sure that, that I'm leaving the place better than I found it, right? And it has nothing to do with time is money, it's just, it boggles my mind sometimes about some of the things that I was taught at such a young age and branded into my mind. And I'm like, no, no,
Yeah.
no. And, it's, it's been, it's all therapeutic, I think, once you're kind of awakened to some of these facts.
Yeah. When so like just so people that are not aware of kind of what the podcast is about. So like it's about you getting clean from alcohol. Like you were an alcoholic for most of your adult life, correct?
Well, so it's interesting. You know, when you look up the definition of alcoholic now, there's a lot of different ways. So I went to college, and I think I developed some really bad habits. And one of those bad habits was binge drinking, right? And binge drinking is now considered by the Alcoholic Anonymous Association, or whatever they want to call themselves, that binge drinking, having more than blah, blah, X amount of drinks in a certain amount of time, is considered an alcoholic.
Mm-hmm.
So I would never like come home on a Tuesday and pour myself a glass of whiskey and just sip it like my grandpa would and
Uh-huh.
smoke his pipe and read the New York Times. When I would drink, I would have no feelings and would not know when to stop. So
Got it.
it was kind of like I'd go out with a group of people on a Saturday night, and I have, they have two drinks and I have six, and they go home and I might stay out.
Gotcha. So like it's
it
not
was,
like you're drinking like every single fucking day, but the times you were drinking, you were just overdoing it.
yes, correct. And then,
Yeah. I developed those same habits in college for sure. And then it took me I mean, after college to honestly only kind of recently to realize I don't have to do that anymore.
yeah. And I think so. So back to the podcast and what I was going through is that the pandemic hit. And at that time, I was in a bad place. I was in a marriage that was in a bad place. I had a family that I didn't have real good connectedness with or relationships with. And all of that seemed to be growing inside of me that I needed to change. And
Mm-hmm.
um, psychedelics helped me make those changes.
But your experience with psychedelics, like you had first tried them when you were in like your early 20s and had like a terrible experience and then never used them again, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's so funny because like the podcast experiences and the episodes are like the way that I experience them. They're only like a year old since I produced them, but they're like 3 years old. So they're I've grown even so much more since then, and all that. But yeah, I mean, I'm a what I found out now, sitting here today, is that my life path is a spiritual path of enlightenment, of enlightenment and experimentation, and bringing ideas out to people that that they're not experiencing because I'm going to go and do it. So I've always lived like that. I've always been on that path. And so, anytime somebody was like, "Hey, you should try some, ecstasy in college," I was like, "Yeah, sounds awesome. Let's expand my mind, or let's try that. I want to feel that, Or I tried mushrooms in college. So yes, but I didn't know what I was doing, of
Yeah.
course,
Yeah,
because you're
there's
just
no intention set and setting behind that. It's more just like let me munch on some mushrooms and see what happens.
yeah, it's a party drug. All
Yeah.
those are party drugs at that point in time.
Yeah.
So
Life was a party.
why not?
So I guess like when did you then decide to like first kind of take that like more spiritual like therapeutic dose?
So I so I just never had really experienced visuals, okay, and on psilocybin mushrooms. I had taken them, a couple times, and one time I talked about in the podcast ended poorly at a music fest in Washington, and so you know in 2020 the pandemic's raging, and I'm getting my hands on some psilocybin, and I decide to just microdose it at first to make sure, that I can handle it and that I know what I'm doing, setting, preparing, being grounded and all that kind of stuff. And I had a really, I think, a profound first foray back into the world of psychedelics after a long break. And so then I was like, well, I'm still kind of leered because everybody talks about these, these visuals that you have and all that. So uh, a couple of my friends and I, we went camping, and that's when the visuals were, just it's funny because you look back on that now, it just brings the biggest smile on my face because it's like a miracle that that like you're like this really works, like this is really happening, and has it happened in that same way again? No, because it doesn't. It's it's just it's very hard to describe because it's different for everybody.
Hmm.
And one of my best friends and trip partners, in fact, is an atheist, and him and I are kind of in a struggle now because I look back on that and I was like, how can you be an atheist after experience something like that? I mean that was I'm not saying that that God is somebody that but it's different for all of us in a
Yeah.
way. But I believe that was something there that day that was helping us all, in a way, moving us all forward. And for me, the visuals, I mean, I get them still to this day, and I just I try to relish, those moments, and try to really take what is being shown to me and try to digest and process them. Sometimes they're harder to take than others, but that's what like why they're there. So
That idea that you just said, the fact that like that day that you felt something was there, like doing something or having some sort of force or effect on you. Do you still feel that like after the shroom trip too? Like as you just go about your normal day, not on psilocybin mushrooms, do you still feel that force?
I think that I think that I am able to tap into that for a certain amount of time, in the sense of that you're integrating kind of what exactly it is that you were feeling on that day, and what the mushrooms were trying to help you process, and what it was doing within your mind. So I think that you know I hear people, they do like one hero dose a year, and that's all they ever do of mushrooms.
Hmm.
And I haven't done a hero dose since my since the last episode, or sixth episode of my podcast or anything like that. I've gotten into some LSD trials and tribulations there, and I've kind of explored that aspect. But I think that you can make it last as long as you want to, and maybe you know I just had a geomancy reading recently. Do you know what that is?
No.
It's interesting. They use like the houses of astrological sign, like astrolog. So there's 12 houses in astrology,
Hmm.
and so then he has this like dice that he kind of rolls, and then the dice, whatever showed up as, is kind of answers your questions and things like that. And within this geomancy reading, talked a lot about like my vices, and that really got me thinking recently about what are my vices, and obviously alcohol was a vice, but that's no longer a vice because
Hmm.
I haven't had a drink for over 3 years now from last week. Um, so so I'm like, is marijuana now a vice of mine, right? And I keep coming back to is marijuana, prohibiting me, you know, and I'm sorry that this is so long-winded to answer your question, but
No, man, that's the whole point of the podcast.
it, the, the end result is if I did one hero dose and didn't use marijuana, could I extend the life of it?
Yeah.
And I don't know the answer to that question. Maybe somebody else can clarify that or not, because I've just used pot as like, I think it lowers my irritability at times. It helps me you know motivate to create sometimes. I mean, there's lots of good uses for pot, but is it a vice of mine?
Yeah.
And I think
The
we don't, as a collective, we don't know that answer right now
Well,
because
I think it's such a personalized answer. Like something is only a vice if you look at it that way. Like you can be using it in the exact same way, shape, or form and simply just not think of it as a vice, or you could be using it in a way and then think of it as a vice. Like it's all in the way that we just like it's all in the narrative that we create in our mind on whether or not something is, I guess, like a vice or not. It's how you're using it. Like it's the intention behind it. At least that's the way that I see it.
yeah,
Like
no, and I think that's the correct answer. Um, and now I need to kind of go back and
it's that, I mean,
yeah,
it's literally just like intention. If there's whatever the intention is behind anything that you're doing, like regardless of whether it's marijuana or even like sitting down and watching Netflix, like things like that, like that's definitely considered a vice. Like I'm sure a lot of people use that as a vice without realizing it, but like there's also nothing wrong with that either. Like something is only a problem if you see it as a problem, but like nothing in life is inherently a problem.
right. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I totally agree with what you're saying. I think you're wise beyond your years. So,
Yeah, I've just I've done a lot of diving into the mind. Um so
and that's
the
healthy. That's a healthy way to live. To be honest, I totally agree with that.
I think so. I think more. I think a lot of people are scared of their own minds. I don't think I'm going out on a limb by saying that either. That like people are genuinely scared of what's inside of their own mind. Like a lot of people don't want to face the truth. A lot of people are scared of the truth. So like, I mean, the whole idea behind like a heroic dose, like obviously that's like the archetype of the hero's journey. But like when you're doing something like that, you are diving into the unknown. Like you do not necessarily know what is in the true depths of your mind. So like it is a heroic journey that you are undertaking by simply saying like I'm going to do this and I have no idea what's on the other side. So like it takes a lot of courage to be able to do that. And I think within the psychedelic community, I don't think that's necessarily talked about enough or acknowledged even, that like it's not easy like to do that.
Well, no, I mean, I podcast about it. I did it back to back weeks, and I look back on that now, and I'm like, how did I do that? Yeah, like how was I how was I so motivated by being inside my own mind that I could do that? Like I just like like I said, I haven't done it since, and I'm not. I mean, I think I need to do something like that. I mean, I think what connected you and I was just I've been intrigued about going on an ayahuasca journey somewhere, and I unfortunately live in the middle of the country, and I'm kind of landlocked, and there's not that very many. There's not a huge spiritual community. It's growing, and there's other things going on. But I'm open to exploring more any
Yeah.
way I can. So
Yeah. I mean, is there something that you can pinpoint as to like, what more it is, I guess, that you're looking for that you haven't gotten?
yeah, I mean, there's a couple things that have popped up since. I have this like I keep having these small visions of me on a trail, and I keep feeling like it's the Appalachian Trail. So there's something that I need to do physically.
Mm.
And maybe it's not the Appalachian Trail, maybe it's a trail in Europe or it's a trail somewhere else, but I keep feeling and seeing some kind of like physical demand because I am on this path of becoming a divine masculine in a way. And the other thing is
Do you not think you already are a divine masculine being?
I think it's an ongoing. I think it. I mean, I feel like I am, but I think that there's just some programming currently that I'm still uh, like deprogramming
Yeah.
myself out of to become the fully, you know, whatever that may end goal look like.
Yeah, see,
So
this is where I'm gonna disagree with you. It's we already are those beings. Like there's nothing more that we can do or be in order to become anything other than we already are right now. Like again, that's all the mind and the ego like playing that trick that you're not the thing that you want to become. Like we already are those things, and it's like we just have to again understand that all of this shit that we have on top of it, like that's not us at our core. That's not our essence. So like we already are all of those divine beings from the second that we're born. We just have a lot of trouble seeing that. And so like that's what psychedelics like help me do. Like it helps me like get rid of all the noise and like really see me for who I am and my essence and all of that and understand it. And then the integration piece for me is just like, okay, remembering back to, well, if I felt like this while I was, on that journey and like, I felt pure in essence, like how do I just maintain that feeling in my normal day-to-day life? Because like I think it reveals the truth for me. At least that's what psychedelics do. Like it's about revealing that truth. So once I see that truth, you've already seen yourself as that divine being. Well, that means that you already are that divine being.
and I appreciate that. I think you're 100% agree with you on everything you just said. I think my struggles internally are that I'm a father and I also have to provide, and be somewhat of a participant in mainstream society.
Yeah.
And so, how that looks like um, as a divine masculine is just it's troubling at times, because do I
Oh yeah, I'm not saying it's easy.
yeah, no, and I think that like one of the things I also get into about the podcast that is I think something that's kind of a buzzword right now is narcissism, and by nature I'm not a narcissist.
Hmm.
I feel too deeply to be a narcissist. Now I have narcissistic tendencies, which I think I've learned through my upbringing and really early on relationships that I had. And I never had someone or a role model or a therapist say, "Hey, these are your these are very toxic tendencies that you're using and very toxic, manipulative things that you're doing to people.
Well, also, I'm
And
sure if somebody would have pointed that out to you, you would have immediately said, "No, go fuck yourself."
right, well, right. Oh yeah, and if you met me at 18 or 19 years old, you wouldn't have met a more cocky person in your entire life. I
Yeah,
mean, you could ask people that I haven't seen for 20 years about me, and they'd be like, "Yeah, that flying K, he's the cockiest asshole you'll ever meet." You know, and of course, there's no way I was going to listen to anybody then. And so I've understood that this is my path in life, and I think that it's funny that this is coming out now, and I don't know who's really guiding the conversation except maybe the divine that's with us.
God.
But yeah, that might. I mean, this is kind of what I've been thinking about if I ever did a season two is everything that we're kind of talking about right now about this divine masculine and toxicity and narcissism and relationships and just in men in general. I mean, how we can exist in this day and age, as divine masculines for the better of the collective
I
because
used
it's
to
important.
I used to genuinely question in college. Like college was the first time that like I started to really recognize feelings, but like also there was like the flip side of that of me like denying those feelings too. So like I genuinely thought I'm like, am I a sociopath? And like I'd probably Google like once every couple months like what makes somebody a sociopath, because like I genuinely was like there were a lot of things on that list that I'm like, I do that, like maybe I'm a sociopath. And just because like I couldn't feel the feelings that like that wanted to come up, like I didn't know how.
So, how did you figure out to get those feelings to come out?
Psychedelics.
Let's just go back to the theme of the
Yeah,
episode.
that was the quick little, oh, okay, this is, I clearly feel all these things. I was
Yeah.
I was used to, I mean, I never used to be able to cry unless I was on psychedelics. And so like I loved, used to always say like I love crying on psychedelics because like that was the only time I could fucking cry. And it's just like so sad. Like now I can cry not on psychedelics too. It's still difficult for me, but like it was so ingrained in me as a kid. Like, men don't cry. You
Well,
cannot cry. Crying is weakness. I'm gonna get taken advantage of if I start crying.
and how much like better do you feel after a good cry?
So good, man. Like,
Oh man, it's like a shedding of the skin in a way, or it's just like it's like the body. It's the way that the body is releasing all those feelings in a good cry. I mean, I literally just had a recent like therapy session, and I walked in, and you got a good therapist when she kind of guides the conversation in just the right way, and it's she can tell she's building you up for something, and then she knows exactly what to say at the right time, and it
just
just
release it
breaks you,
all.
and you're just like, and then I ended up crying for like 40 minutes straight. And of course, at the end, she's like, "You're okay," and I'm like, "I feel great,"
Yeah.
And I'm like,
I feel
I'm
amazing.
not, no therapist. I'm not going to kill myself. I just cried. I'm not going to kill myself. I mean, maybe your other male patients, they may go kill themselves after a good cry. I'm good. I like
Yeah.
that idea.
Yeah, I mean,
But
because some people like afterwards will get back into that like shame cycle and like shame themselves for crying because like again, it's
crying,
so deeply embedded in them that like that's not okay to do.
right? Yeah. No, crying is, I think, is so therapeutic, and I think that, listen, to be able to share and be able to be vulnerable, those are hugely important. And let me put it this way, very attractive, right? If you're a single man out there and you're having trouble being vulnerable, it's very attractive to women. The divine feminine likes,
To the to the
vulnerability.
to the to the right woman, that's the thing, because like they're just as there are men that like think it's not okay to cry, there are so many women that also like fall into the, you know, the trap of what society has told them to be, is that like they just need to be like caretakers, and like men shouldn't cry, and they always need to be tough and protective and all that shit. But like if you're vibrating like at your highest frequency, that's going to attract other people that are vibrating at their highest frequency, and like that's the attractive part. But like if you've lived most of your life sort of at that lower frequency, just based on like the patterns that you follow, like those are still probably going to be the women that you're attracted to. And you have to like realize that from the get-go, that like those are not the women for you anymore.
Well, and I think you created just a great way to separate people living in this world right now is low frequency and high
Yeah.
frequency. I mean, let if you want to be in a low frequency place, let's do it. You know, we'll put them all in the Ozarks and let them swim and piss and shit and have a good time. You know, all us high frequency people will be vibing and, you know, loving and you know, caring about people and doing what we can to make the world a better place. And I think
Yeah.
that's what it's about. I mean, it's you know, trying to help people raise their frequency and doing it the only way you know how, which is to be yourself.
And that's it. And like that's, it's raising your own frequency, like that then helps others raise theirs. Like you can't come from a place of like not doing the inner work and like trying to be like, you know, have a fucking god complex or savior complex or whatever, and try getting other people better if like you haven't done the work on yourself, or like aren't willing to do it and be vulnerable. Like I'm not saying you need to be an enlightened divine being by any fucking means, but like you just have to be authentic and like be yourself, even if you're at that place where like you don't want to be, even if you're still an alcoholic and still using these vices, if you can just be truthful about that and like be honest and vulnerable about where you're at, like that already puts you at that higher frequency regardless of what you're doing.
And I think that you're just nailing it on the head. It's just truth. It's just what is the truth.
Hmm.
And I think the when you're able to know your own truth, it's easier to see when other people aren't being truthful.
Yeah, I had this conversation with my grandma yesterday, and she was asking me questions about like what I'm doing basically, because her view of psychedelics is you know, largely based on propaganda in the 60s.
Right.
And you know, she was a nurse in a psych ward, so like she was dealing with schizophrenic people and like actual people with psychosis all day, so like psychedelics are not a good thing for those people. So
Right.
like very understandable. But we're having this question, you know, this conversation, and you know, I got to talking about basically just the ways that like the body holds trauma, and I'm reading this book called like The Body Keeps Score, which is a great book that I definitely recommend. You know, I was just talking, she's like, we just weren't really taught this, like I didn't know a lot of these things, and I'm like, you know, if you're interested, like I think you should read this book. And she's like, you know what, I don't think I will. I don't think I'm at an age where like I want to know all of these things. Like I don't want that to get released in my mind. It's like I'm doing fine right now, and I don't want something to come in to make that not be the case. I was like, fair enough. I understand that, but like, you know, most people I think also think that way too. Like if, you know, everything in their mind is going great, but like that's just a lot of the times like the mask that they put on for themselves to convince that like it's the story they tell themselves that things are going great, but like deep down like they're not having fun, they're not happy.
Yeah, I don't have much to add to that. I mean, I don't even talk to my parents about, you know, what I'm out here doing or anything like that. So, but I think that though, like we we just our job, you know, if your grandma thinks that she's leaving the world a better place than she found it, then that's all that really matters.
I
I
agree.
you know, and I just keep going back to that for myself is, you know, just as a father is I'm trying to raise, you know, my consciousness to make it a better place so that they can, you know, live in a more, I don't know, peaceful.
Yeah.
Uh,
Do you talk to your kids about psychedelic use or anything like that, or is this still largely like a part that you hide from them as well?
Yeah, I mean, they're too young to kind of bring in. They know I have a podcast that's been talked about. I don't think they listen to it. But I don't. Yeah, I don't. I'm pretty sure they haven't listened to it. Nor do it. I mean, that's the other thing about kids. You know, kids nowadays are just so different than, when I was growing up, and playing in the backyard or whatever. I mean, attention spans are so much shorter.
Yeah, it
They're,
sucks.
video games are just so much more, creative and engaging. And the fact that you're able to just sit on, a chair and or it's just like you and I are conversing, you're in Denver and I'm in Kansas City. It's just like, you know, this wasn't available a long
Yeah.
time ago. And so they're able to do this on a much more daily scale and utilize this stuff. So,
I mean, literally yesterday I saw this thing. I think I saw it online that was talking about how, like, I mean, even just, 25 years ago, before everybody in their fucking minds had a cell phone, like, if you were stepping out for the day, like, you were actually just out for the day. Like, people couldn't reach you. And, like, how fucking freeing is that? Like, do you know how amazing that sounds to me to be able to just go out and just know that, like, if I'm gone for 8 hours of my life and I come back and, like, even if, five people call me or some shit and just leave a message on my home phone, which I obviously don't have, but, like, knowing that, like, it's not expected of me to be able to just, like, be on fucking call and, like, have attention 24/7, like, it's exhausting.
totally. And I, I lived in a time I was in college. My early college years were pre cell phone, and so having a home phone was still a thing and an answering service, and you would get voicemails through your home phone, and then you got a little cell phone, and I would just lose it all the time. I wouldn't take it out. I mean, I just I was the type of guy, and maybe it goes back to being Flying K, but I would go out with one group of friends and come home with a completely different set
Yeah.
and a different group. And I mean, I just kind of weave my way in and out of people's lives, and that's just kind of how I like being. But yeah, so you want to, we were earlier talking about maybe a tarot reading. I kind of,
I want to talk about what, like, I know almost nothing about it. Like, I watched one of your videos, but, like, in like a high level, like, what is a tarot reading?
so tarot is a real good, way of managing energy.
Hmm.
Okay. It's almost a divination tool, to utilize your higher spirit guides, your higher powers, and for me to channel into that, to bring you some top of mind messages that you may need to hear in the moment.
Yeah.
And you're able to ask questions and things like that. And how I got to playing with tarot, or some people call it tarot or whatever, um,
It looks
is I
like
was
tarot.
actually tarot. Yeah, it looks like tarot, or uh, but whatever. Here's the thing: it's I had a birth chart reading of astrology, and I'm a Cancer rising and a Cancer moon, and they're conjunct. And the astrologer told me that based on that alone, I'm a very powerful psychic and intuitive presence.
Hmm.
And I said to her, I said, "Well, I don't feel that right now. How do I dive into that?" And she told me tarot cards were a good way to get that, and it truly was like it really started me on this path of becoming somewhat of a psychic. And when we were talking about earlier about being a divine masculine, that's what I was kind of alluding to, in the sense that I still had to overcome some, projections of myself and some ego struggles and things like that is how do I reach what I was set on this earth to do in this physical form? And
Yeah.
I think it has something to do with being a psychic and helping manage people's energy and bringing healing messages in different ways.
Yeah, man. That's beautiful. I mean, I don't really have anything to add to that.
Yeah,
But like,
I really, what I like most about, like, if you and I just sat down and did a tarot reading together is I just like helping you, right? And pushing you forward on your path, and yeah, would you pull a card that might be a questionable card or might have some negative connotation to it? Sure, but what life doesn't have a negative connotation or a negative left turn to it? It just that's life. And at the end of the day, we just have to live it the best we can and deal with the stuff that comes up along the way. So,
man, I'm gonna end on that right there because that right there sums up everything everything like the whole reason why I do this, like why I want to have these conversations is to help people get back to that. Like we're just here for a finite amount of time to like I don't know, just try to live our best lives, whatever the fuck that means. And like there's no right way to do it. And like we can't control our lives and try to just like positive, positive, positive all the time. Like that's not life. Life is experiencing the full spectrum of emotions and shit that life has to offer without trying to control it and like just letting it flow through you. That's it.
beautiful, beautiful, man. And hey, all your energy and work is so much appreciated, at least by me and I'm sure others out there. And continued success and keep doing it.
Hell yeah, man. Well, I appreciate that, brother. Wishing you much love, and we'll have to do a tarot reading.
Yeah, maybe we'll just we'll make it a podcast episode. So,
Hell yeah. All right. Cheers,
hey,
brother. Appreciate
thank
it.
you. Yeah.
Thank you all for joining me and listening to this episode of the Trip Sitting Podcast. I hope you were able to get some helpful tips or just maybe think about life in a bit of a different way. And if you have any ideas for guests or if you even want to be a guest on the podcast, please feel free to shoot me an email at tripsittingblog@gmail.com or shoot me a DM on Instagram at tripsitting.blog. And then also too, go back and check out any of the other episodes. And thank you so much for listening. Really, really appreciate the support. And we'll see you next week.